The beginning. I put the house up for sale on a Tuesday. I remember that because Tuesdays used to be grocery days when Laura was still here. She liked routines. Said they kept the week from falling apart. The realtor hammered the for sale sign into the front yard while I stood on the porch pretending I wasn't watching. The sky was low and gray, the kind of Midwest sky that feels permanent. Our street looked the same as it had for 23 years. Identical lawns, identical mailboxes, identical flags hanging from porches, like quiet declarations that everything was fine. Everything was not fine. Laura died last year. I've said that sentence enough times that it feels worn smooth, like a coin passed through too many hands. My wife died last year. It was an accident. She fell down the basement stairs. That's the version that fits inside a conversation. The realtor's name was Denise, early 40s, practical haircut, flat shoes. She asked me if I planned to stay in town. I don't know, I said. Maybe Arizona. My brother's out there. I don't have a brother in Arizona. I don't know why I said that. Denise nodded like she believed me anyway. People nod when they don't want details. When she left, I stood in the driveway longer than I meant to. The house looked normal. 2 stories, beige siding, a small crack near the upstairs window that I'd been meaning to fix for 6 years. It didn't look like a place where someone had died. Inside, it still smelled faintly of lemon cleaner. I'd wiped down the counters that morning. Denise said buyers notice smells first. I didn't tell her that sometimes. Late at night, I smell something else. Not rot. Not exactly. Just dampness, like old water sitting somewhere it shouldn't. The first night after the sign went up, I dreamed about the basement. In the dream, I was standing at the top of the stairs. The light was on. I could see the bottom clearly, the concrete floor, the old shelving unit with paint cans, the water heater humming in the corner. And Laura was down there, not moving, just standing, looking up at me. When he woke up, I was already sitting on the edge of the bed. My feet were on the floor. I don't remember standing up. The house was quiet. Too quiet. I used to complain about the refrigerator running too loud. Now the silence presses against my ears like altitude. I checked the basement. Of course, I did. The stairs creaked under my weight. They've always creaked. 3rd step from the top. 7th step near the bottom. I fixed them once. They creaked again anyway. The basement was empty. Concrete dry. Air still. No sign of anything. I stood there longer than necessary. "You're alone," I said out loud. My voice sounded smaller than I expected. The open house was scheduled for Sunday. That gave me 5 days to make the place look less lived in and more like a model of someone else's future. I boxed up Laura's clothes first. That felt practical. Detached. I folded her sweaters carefully, even though I knew no one would see them again. She liked soft fabrics. She'd rub the sleeve between her fingers while watching TV. Said it relaxed her. I opened the closet to take down the last of her dresses and hesitated. There was more space than I remembered. I stood there counting hangers. 1, 2, 3, 4. There should have been more. I closed the door. Grief does strange things to memory. I've read that. The next morning, I found the basement door open, not wide, just slightly ajar. I was sure I'd closed it the night before. I have a habit of checking doors twice now. 3 times, sometimes. I walked over and pushed it shut. The handle felt cold, colder than the air around it. I told myself it was draft from the foundation. The thing about this house is that it was built in 1987, but the land is older, much older. When we first moved in, Laura found an old survey map tucked into a kitchen drawer. The builder must have left it behind. There had been something marked on the property before the house. A circle. No label. Probably a well, she said back then, or septic. We never looked into it. Sunday came faster than I wanted. Denise arrived early with a clipboard and that bright, professional smile that doesn't reach the eyes. "We've got 3 couples," she said. "Good turnout." I nodded. I'd already decided I wouldn't stay inside during the showing. Denise said, "Sellers hovering makes buyers uncomfortable." So I stood across the street in Mr. Keller's driveway. He moved to Florida 2 years ago. His house is empty too. From there, I watched strangers walk into my life. A young couple first, maybe early 30s. They held hands as they stepped through the front door. Then an older woman alone. Then a man in a baseball cap who didn't stay long. The young couple spent the most time in the basement. I could see the light turn on through the small ground-level window. They were down there longer than necessary. I don't know why that bothered me. When they finally came out, the woman looked pale. She whispered something to her husband. They left quickly after that. Denise crossed the street when it was over. "Overall, good feedback," she said. "Solid structure, nice light. And..." She hesitated. One of them mentioned the basement fell. Off? How? She shifted her clipboard from one arm to the other. "Cold. Damp. A little claustrophobic. It's a basement." She nodded quickly. "Exactly." But she didn't look convinced. That night, I went down there again. The air did feel colder. Not dramatically, just enough to notice. I walked to the center of the concrete floor and stood still. There was a faint sound. I thought at first it was the water heater. But it wasn't mechanical. It was irregular. Soft. Like something moving slowly through water. I held my breath. The sound stopped. I waited. Nothing. "You're alone," I said again. But this time it didn't feel like a reassurance. It felt like a question. On Wednesday, I tried to find Laura's death certificate. I don't know why I waited a year. Maybe because I never needed it. Denise had asked if I had all the paperwork in order. Buyers sometimes want records. Insurance. Renovations. Major events. Major events. I opened the filing cabinet in the home office. Taxes. Mortgage statements. Old warranties. No death certificate. I checked the second drawer. Nothing. I sat back in the chair slowly. That didn't make sense. I remembered signing forms. Talking to someone at the hospital. Arrangements. I remembered the casket. Closed. I remembered the way the funeral home smelled like artificial flowers. So where were the papers? I told myself they must be in a safe deposit box. At the bank. That felt logical, but I couldn't remember going to the bank. I couldn't remember which branch we used. I couldn't remember if we even had a box. That night, I dreamed of the basement again. Only this time, I wasn't at the top of the stairs. I was at the bottom, looking up, and someone was standing above me. I couldn't see their face because the hallway light was behind them, but I knew the shape. I woke up on the basement floor. The light was on. My cheek was against the concrete. It was cold, very cold. I stood up too quickly and nearly slipped. There was no one there. The stairs were empty. The door at the top was closed. I don't remember walking down. I don't remember opening the door. I don't remember turning on the light. I told myself I must be sleepwalking. That's reasonable. Stress does that. Grief does that. I climbed back upstairs and locked the basement door. I stood there, staring at the lock longer than necessary. Then I turned around and saw something on the living room wall. A photograph. It had always been there. Our wedding picture. Laura in white. Me in a suit that didn't quite fit. I stepped closer. Her face looked slightly different. Not dramatically. Just softer. Healthier. Like the version of her from before the last year. I reached up and touched the glass. It was warm. That didn't make sense. The house was cool. I pulled the frame off the wall. The back was sealed tight. No sign of tampering. I put it back exactly where it had been. On Thursday afternoon, Denise called. We had an inquiry, she said. From the older woman. That's good. She asked. A question I couldn't answer. What question? She paused. She asked if the house had ever been vacant for long periods before you listed it. I frowned. It's never been vacant. Another pause. She said it felt like no one had lived there for years. After we hung up, I walked slowly through the house. Kitchen, dining room, living room. Everything was in place, but something felt staged, like a model home pretending to be mine. I went upstairs. Our bedroom door was half open. I never leave it that way. Inside, the bed was made tightly. Hospital corners. Laura used to do that. I don't. I walked to the closet and opened it. It was empty. Completely empty. No hangers. No boxes. Nothing. My heart began to beat faster. I stepped back into the hallway and looked toward the other bedroom, the guest room. The door was closed. I pushed it open slowly. Inside were stacks of boxers. Laura's clothes, exactly where I had packed them. I stood there, breathing hard. That's when I realized something. I couldn't remember packing them. I remembered deciding to. I remembered folding one sweater, but I couldn't remember finishing. Downstairs, something shifted. A faint sound, like wood selling, or a step taken too carefully. I moved toward the stairs. The basement door was still locked. I checked. Twice, I turned around and for just a second, I thought I saw someone standing at the end of the hallway. A silhouette tall, still, watching. I blinked. It was gone. I didn't go downstairs that night. Instead, I sat at the kitchen table and tried to reconstruct the day Laura died. We had dinner, I think. There was an argument. About what? Money. No. About moving. She wanted to leave town. I didn't. That sounds right. She went to the basement to get something. Paint samples. A box. I followed her. She slipped. That part I'm certain of. She fell. I remember the sound, a hollow impact, then silence. But when I try to picture her at the bottom of the stairs, the image won't stay still. Sometimes she is nearby. Sometimes she's sitting up. Sometimes she's looking at me. And sometimes she isn't there at all. I stood up from the table slowly. The house felt larger than it used to, or emptier. I walked to the front window and looked out at the for sale sign. It stood perfectly straight in the yard, under the porch light. The house looked unoccupied, like no one had lived here in a long time. Behind me, somewhere deep in the structure of the house, there was a sound. Not loud, not sudden, just a subtle, patient shift, as if something inside the walls had adjusted itself and settled in. The next morning, I woke up convinced I had overreacted. That's how it always begins. You spend the night building a structure out of fear, and by daylight it looks flimsy, manageable, embarrassing. I made coffee, sat at the kitchen table, watched the steam rise from the mug like it had every other morning for the past year. There was a yellow legal pad in front of me. I don't remember putting it there. On the top line, in my handwriting, were the words, "Find proof." I stared at them for a long time. Proof of what? I knew what. I just didn't want to say it out loud. I went back to the filing cabinet, opened every drawer, removed every folder, spread papers across the floor like I was building a case against myself. Insurance policies, utility bills, medical statements from the year before Laura died. There were records of routine checkups, lab work, a prescription refill, but nothing from the week she died. No hospital bill, no coroner's report, no receipt from the funeral home. I'd told myself I might have thrown those away. Maybe I didn't want reminders, but that didn't feel right. I'm not a man who throws away paperwork. I keep warranties for appliances that no longer exist. I drove to the bank. The woman at the counter was young, mid-20s. Friendly in the cautious way employees are trained to be. "I need to access my safe deposit box," I said. She typed my name into her computer. "I'm not seeing one under your account, Mr. Harper. I've had one for years." She shook her head gently. "There's no record of that here. Maybe at another branch. Would you like me to check?" I hesitated. Yes. No. If there was no box, that meant something. If there was a box, that meant something too. "Never mind," I said. "It's probably nothing." On the drive home, I tried to reconstruct the funeral. I remembered standing beside a closed casket. I remembered shaking hands. I remembered someone saying, "She's at peace." But I couldn't remember the church, or the minister's name, or who sat in the front row. When I pulled into the driveway, Denise's car was parked in front of the house. She stood on the porch holding her phone. "Oh, good," she said when she saw me. "I was just about to call you." "What's wrong?" She hesitated in a way that made me brace myself. "I had another showing this morning, a man from out of state. He's relocating, and he left early. That happens." She studied my face carefully. He asked me how long the house had been empty. I felt a tightening in my chest. "It hasn't been empty." That's what I told him. What did he say? She shifted her weight. He said the house feels preserved, like a place someone left in a hurry and never came back. I looked past her into the living room. Sunlight filtered through the blinds. The couch was exactly where it had always been. The coffee table still had the small scratch from when we dropped a ceramic bowl 10 years ago. "It's lived in," I said. She nodded slowly, but there was doubt in her eyes. After she left, I walked through the house again. Kitchen, living room, dining room. Everything appeared normal, but something was wrong with the air. It felt undisturbed, like no one had exhaled here in a long time. I went upstairs. Our bedroom door was closed. I was certain I had left it open that morning. I turned the knob. The room was darker than it should have been. The curtains were drawn tight. Laura used to open them every morning. She said natural light kept depression away. I walked to the window and pulled the curtains back. Dust motes drifted in the sunlight. Too many. Thicker than they should have been. I wiped my finger across the dresser. It came back gray. That didn't make sense. I clean. I've been cleaning constantly. I opened the top drawer. Empty. I opened the second. Empty. All of Laura's jewelry had been there. I remembered packing it. I remembered placing the velvet box inside a cardboard container. But now the drawers were bare. I stepped into the closet. It was full, not empty like the night before. Full. Her clothes hung in neat rows. Blouses, dresses, jackets. I reached out and touched one. The fabric felt real, substantial. I pressed my face into the sleeve and inhaled. There was no scent, no perfume. Just the faint smell of old cotton. I stepped back slowly. The hallway felt narrower when I exited the room. The walls seemed closer together. I paused at the top of the basement stairs. The door was closed. The lock was still engaged. I unlocked it. The metal clicked louder than it should have. I opened the door and stood there listening. Nothing. I flipped the light switch. The bulb flickered once before settling into a steady glow. The basement looked exactly as it always had. Concrete floor, shelves, water heater. But there was something new. In the center of the floor, directly beneath where I had been standing in my dream, was a faint circular stain, darker than the rest of the concrete, about 3 feet across. I stepped down, slowly. The air grew colder with each step. Not dramatically, just enough to make me aware of it. I knelt beside the stain and ran my hand over it. The surface was dry, but the color was unmistakable, like something had once pooled there. I stood up too quickly and felt dizzy. I leaned against the wall and closed my eyes. That's when I heard it. A whisper, not from the room. From inside my head, you remember? I opened my eyes. The basement was silent. You remember? It said again. I pressed my hands against my temples. This is stress, I said out loud. This is grief. The whisper didn't argue. It didn't need to. That night, I dreamed about the stairs again. But this time, Laura wasn't at the bottom. She was halfway up, reaching for me. Her mouth was moving, but I couldn't hear what she was saying. I reached down to grab her hand and she dissolved, like smoke in water. I woke up in bed. The room was dark, but there was a shape beside me. I turned my head slowly. The indentation on the mattress was deep, as if someone had just been lying there. I reached out. The sheets were cold. I sat up and turned on the lamp. The bed was empty. The indentation was gone. I swung my legs over the side and stood up. The hallway light was on. I hadn't left it on. I walked toward it carefully. Each step felt deliberate, measured. At the end of the hallway, near the staircase, there was a figure. Tall, still, facing away from me. My breath caught in my throat. "Laura," I said. The figure didn't move. I took another step forward. It flickered, like a reflection disturbed by water. Then it was gone. The hallway was empty. I stood there for a long time. Then I did something I should have done earlier. I called her phone. I hadn't tried in months. I expected it to go straight to voicemail. Instead, it rang. Once, twice, 3 times. My heart began to pound. On the 4th ring, it stopped. No voicemail message. No automated voice. Just silence. Then the line disconnected. I stared at the screen. Her contact still had a photo attached. The same wedding picture from the living room wall. She looked vibrant, alive. The next day, I drove to the cemetery. I knew where her grave was. I had stood there. I had placed flowers. I had watched dirt fall onto wood. I walked between the rows slowly, scanning names: Harper, Hanson, Miller. I reached the spot where I was certain her headstone stood. There was nothing there, just grass, undisturbed. No indentation, no marker. I checked the row number against the map at the entrance. I was in the right section. I walked the entire cemetery twice. Her name was nowhere. I approached the small office near the gate. An older man sat behind the desk, reading a newspaper. "Can I help you?" he asked. "I'm looking for my wife's grave," I said. He typed her name into his computer. "Laura Harper." "Yes." He frowned slightly. "I'm not finding any record of her being interred here." "That's impossible." He turned the screen slightly so I could see. The database was empty. "No burial record," he said. "Are you sure this is the right cemetery?" I stepped back from the desk. "Yes," I said automatically. But the certainty was gone. When I returned home, the house felt different. Not hostile, just aware. Like it had been waiting. I walked into the kitchen and stopped. On the table was a grocery receipt, dated 2 days ago. Items listed: milk, bread, apples, black coffee. Laura used to drink black coffee. I picked up the receipt. The total was highlighted in yellow. At the bottom beneath the printed line was a handwritten note. "You didn't lose me." My hands began to shake. I checked my wallet. The credit card used on the receipt was mine. I didn't remember going to the store. I opened the refrigerator. There was milk. Fresh. Expiration date next week. There were apples in the fruit bowl. Bright. Unbruised. I leaned against the counter. "I'm not losing my mind," I whispered. The house didn't respond, but the silence felt thicker. I walked slowly to the basement door, unlocked it, opened it. The air that rose from below was colder than before. I descended the stairs carefully. The circular stain was darker now. Wider, almost 5 feet across. I crouched beside it, and for the first time, I saw movement. Not dramatic, not obvious, just a subtle ripple beneath the surface, as if the concrete were liquid for a second. I reached out and touched it. The ripple stopped. I pulled my hand back quickly. My palm was dry, but I could feel something. A faint vibration, like a pulse. "You didn't lose me," the whisper said again. I stood up abruptly. "You're not real," I said. The whisper didn't argue. It didn't need to, because somewhere deep in the structure of the house, something shifted, and this time it sounded almost like laughter. The first time I heard my father's voice after we buried him, I told myself it was grief. Grief has a way of borrowing familiar sounds and replaying them when the house is quiet. A settling beam becomes a footstep. The hum of the refrigerator turns into a low murmur. Your own breathing, if you lie still long enough, starts to sound like someone else standing in the doorway. But this wasn't the house settling. It was my name, spoken the way he used to say it when I was a kid and had wandered too far from the yard. Not angry, not gentle either, just steady. A warning wrapped in patience. David. I was in the basement, sorting through the last of his tools. The concrete floor was cold through my jeans. A single bulb swung overhead, and for a second I thought the movement of the light might have distorted the sound. I held my breath and listened. Nothing. Just the faint buzz of electricity and the slow tick of the furnace cooling down. I almost laughed at myself. 52 years old, a retired contractor, a man who'd built 2 houses with his own hands, and I was spooked by an echo in an empty room. Then it came again. Closer. "David, don't." The word dragged, like it had to travel through something thick before it reached me. I stood up too fast and cracked my head on the exposed ductwork. The pain helped. Itanturme reminded me I was in my father's basement in upstate New York, not inside some nightmare stitched together by exhaustion. I walked to the bottom of the stairs and looked up. The door at the top was closed. Light from the kitchen bled around the edges, pale and teen. No shadows passed in front of it. No footsteps crossed the floor above. My wife, Ellen, had driven back to Albany that morning. She couldn't stand the house anymore. Said it felt like it was watching her. I'd told her she was letting her imagination run wild. Standing there, staring at that closed door, I started to understand what she meant. I forced myself up the stairs. Each step creaked the same way it had since I was 12. The sounds were predictable, almost comforting. I counted them without meaning to. 11 steps. Always 11. At the top, I opened the door. The kitchen was empty. The clock over the sink read 3:17 p.m. Sunlight filtered through the curtains, catching dust in the air. Everything looked normal, ordinary, except for the back door. It was open, just a few inches, enough for a strip of cold March air to slide across the floor. I was certain I'd locked it. I remember checking it twice before going downstairs. Out here, on 10 acres of woods, you don't leave doors open. I crossed the kitchen slowly, the boards groaning under my weight. The wind nudged the door a little wider as I approached, like a hand inviting me closer. Beyond it, the yard stretched toward the tree line. The old oak stood at the center, branches still bare from winter. My father had hung a tire swing from that tree when I was 7. The swing was moving. Not much, just a lazy back and forth. Maybe a few inches each way. There was no breeze strong enough to do that. I stepped outside. The cold hit me hard, sharper than it should have been for late March. My breath fogged immediately. I listened for footsteps in the grass, for the crunch of someone retreating toward the woods. Nothing. Just the distant caw of a crow. I walked to the oak. The rope of the tire swing was frayed near the top. Fibers splayed like old hair. It hadn't been used in years. The tire itself was stiff, dry with age. I put my hand on it to stop the motion. The rubber was warm. Not sun-warmed. The sun wasn't strong enough for that. Body warm. I pulled my hand back as if I'd touched a stove. Get a grip, I muttered to myself. You're tired, that's all. I turned toward the woods. The line of trees was dense, a wall of gray trunks and tangled undergrowth. My father used to say the land went back farther than it looked. Woods played tricks on distance. He'd tell me, you think you see the end of them, but they keep going. As I stared into that dim lattice of branches, I had the uneasy sense that something inside was staring back, then saw it move men, not an animal, too upright, too deliberate. A figure slipping between the trees, about 50 yards in. My first thought was trespasser. Maybe some hunter cutting across the property. My second thought was worse. The figure was tall, broad-shouldered. The way it moved, slow, slightly stooped, looked painfully familiar. Dad. The word left my mouth before I could stop it. The figure paused, just for a second. Then it continued deeper into the woods. I don't remember deciding to follow. I just remember stepping forward, the damp grass soaking through my sneakers, the cold air burning in my lungs. The ground turned uneven as I crossed into the trees. Twigs snapped underfoot. The smell of wet earth and rot rose up around me. Hey! I shouted. This is private property. No response. But I could still see him or it moving ahead. Not running. Not even hurrying. Just maintaining that same steady pace, as if it knew I would keep coming. The woods swallowed sound. After a few yards, the house disappeared behind the trunks. The world narrowed to gray bark and shadow. I tried to close the distance, but every time I thought I was gaining, the figure seemed to drift just a little farther away. My chest tightened not from exertion, but from recognition. The jacket, it was brown canvas, faded at the shoulders. My father's work jacket. We'd buried him in that jacket. I stopped walking. My heart pounded so hard I could feel it in my throat. That's not possible, I whispered. The figure stopped again. Slowly, it turned. The face was still half hidden by trees, but I saw enough. The jawline, the sagging skin at the neck, the hollow eyes. They weren't glowing. They weren't rotting. There was no dramatic horror to it. It just looked like him, exactly like him, and he was looking straight at me. His mouth opened. Why did you dig? The voice was clearer now. Not warped, not distant. Accusing, I didn't, I said automatically, though my mind raced back to the basement, to the loose concrete behind the furnace, to the shallow trench I'd uncovered beneath it that morning. He took one step toward me. The air grew colder, pressing against my skin like wet cloth. "You should have left it alone," he said. A memory surfaced then, one I hadn't thought about in decades. I was 9. I'd found a rusted lockbox buried near the edge of the woods. I'd run to him, excited, proud. He'd taken it from me without a word. That night, I'd woken up to voices outside my window. Low, urgent, I'd peeked through the blinds and seen him standing at the tree line, holding that box, talking to someone in the dark. The next morning, the box was gone, and he'd told me, very carefully, never to dig on this land again. I backed away now, my heel catching on a root. "What's under the basement?" I demanded, anger pushing through the fear. "What did you hide?" His expression didn't change, but the woods behind him did. Shadows thickened, coiling between the trees. Shapes moved in the gaps, talentin bending at impossible angles. "They were here first," he said. "I made a deal." A branch snapped somewhere to my left, then to my right. The forest wasn't quiet anymore. It was breathing. "You think burying it was enough?" he continued. "You think concrete keeps them out?" The ground beneath my feet trembled faintly, like something shifting far below. "I tried to protect you," he said, and for the first time, there was something like regret in his voice. "But you went digging." The shadows began to stretch toward me. I stumbled back again, panic finally taking over. I turned and ran. Branches clawed at my face. Roots snagged my feet. I didn't look back. I didn't want to see how close they were. Behind me, I heard movement, not just one set of footsteps, but many. Fast. Closing in. The house burst into view between the trees, a pale shape against the gray sky. I sprinted toward it, lungs burning, legs screaming. As I reached the yard, I risked a glance over my shoulder. The tree line was still, empty. No figures, no shadows, just silent woods. I didn't slow down until I was inside, slamming the back door and locking it with shaking hands. The kitchen felt smaller now, the air heavier from somewhere below in the basement. I heard it. A dull, rhythmic thud, like something striking concrete over and over. When I came to, I was still inside the house. That was the first impossible thing. The kitchen was intact, the floor unbroken. No roots, no hollow beneath it. The cabinets stood where they had always stood, the table upright, the picture frame back on the wall without a crack in the glass. Morning light filtered through the curtains in the same thin stripes I remembered from childhood. I was lying on my back on the kitchen floor, staring at the ceiling. For a long time, I didn't move. I didn't trust movement. I didn't trust memory. I didn't trust the absence of damage. I remember the collapse. I remember the roots around my leg. I remember the floor splitting open. I remember falling. There is no confusion in that. No haze. No dreamlike blur. I remember the sound of the oak tree breaking in half. I remember the smell of earth filling my lungs as I went down. But the house was whole. I sat up slowly. My body ached as if I'd been dragged across gravel. My hands were scraped. Dirt caked under my nails. That was Rev. My jeans were torn at the knee. The basement door was closed. I stood and walked toward it. Every step felt measured, deliberate. I wasn't panicked anymore. panic had burned out of me during the fall, if that's what it was. What replaced it was clarity. The kind of cold certainty that settles in aftershock. The house was holding her. I don't know when the thought formed, only that by the time my hand touched the basement knob, it felt like something I had always known. The house was holding her. Elle and I opened the door and went down the 11 steps. The bulb at the bottom flicked on without hesitation this time. The slab near the furnace was intact. No crack. No seam. Smooth, continuous concrete. But the air was wrong. It was warmer than it should have been. Not by much, but enough that I felt it against my skin. And beneath the warmth was something else. Something faint and metallic, like blood diluted in water. I walked to the center of the basement and turned slowly in a circle. "You can let her go," I said, my voice steady. "You have me." The words didn't feel dramatic. They felt factual. The furnace hummed. The pipes ticked. Nothing answered. I thought about the years. Ellen and I had been married. 27. Long enough to memorize the way she breathed in her sleep. Long enough to predict which news stories would make her angry and which would make her quiet. She had hated this house from the moment we arrived for the funeral. "It feels occupied," she'd said that first night. I told her it was grief. I told her old houses settle and groan. I told her she was projecting. Now I understood. The house wasn't holding something beneath it. It was holding someone within it. I closed my eyes and tried to picture the day of the funeral again. The coffin. The lid, the weight of it when we lowered it into the ground. I remember the silence when the first shovel of dirt hit wood. I remember standing beside Ellen, her hand tight around mine. I remember the coffin. I remember closing the lid. I remember the smell of polished wood. I cannot remember what color it was. That detail slipped through me like water through a sieve. I tried to force it back into focus. Was it mahogany? Was it oak? Dark, light. I see my hands resting on it. I see the brass handle near my thumb. But I don't see the color. I open my eyes. The basement felt closer now. The walls nearer than they had been moments before. "She didn't want to stay," I said. "You know that." The concrete beneath my feet gave a faint vibration. Not violent, not threatening, responsive. I crouched and placed my palm flat against the floor. "Warm. She's not yours," I said softly. "She never belonged to you." The warmth intensified beneath my hand, spreading outward in a slow circle. Not burning, just present. "She left," I continued. "She drove back to Albany. I watched her taillights disappear down the road. I remember that. Clear as anything. I stood in the driveway. I raised my hand. She didn't look back, but when I tried to picture the car, I hesitate. Was it her blue Subaru? Or my truck? The house had taken her the way it tried to take me. Not with violence, with containment. With inheritance. My father made a deal for time, not just his. Generations. Continuity. The vibration strengthened, a low hum threaded through the concrete, rising through my bones into my chest. The furnace shut off abruptly, leaving only that sound. "She doesn't understand what you are," I said. "But I do." I stood and walked to the shelf where my father kept his old tools. The sledgehammer was still there, handle worn smooth from decades of use. I lifted it. It felt heavier than it should have. I won't make his deal, I said. I won't extend it. I brought the hammer down on the slab. The crack of metal against concrete echoed through the basement. A fractal line spidered outward from the point of impact. Dust rose into the air. The hum shifted in pitch. I swung again. Another fracture. Wider this time. The warmth surged up through the floor and into my boots, climbing my legs like slow water. Not restraining. Not yet. You can have me, I said through clenched teeth, but you let her go. The third strike shattered the surface. Concrete splintered and fell inward, revealing dark soil beneath. And then I heard it, not from below, from above. Footsteps. Slow. Measured. Crossing the kitchen floor. I froze. David. Her voice, clear, unbroken. I dropped the hammer and ran for the stairs, taking them two at a time. She was standing in the kitchen when I reached the top. Ellen, wearing the same coat she'd worn the morning she left. Hair pulled back the way she always did when she drove long distances. She looked tired, but real, solid. Relief hit me so hard my knees almost gave out. You came back, I said. She frowned slightly. I never left. The sentence slid into me like a blade. You drove to Albany, I said carefully. Yesterday morning, I watched you go. She shook her head. David, we've been here all week. That wasn't right. The funeral had been 3 days ago. She'd stayed 2 nights and left on the third. I remember standing in the driveway. I remember the taillights, but when I try to remember the sound of the engine fading, there's nothing there. Just silence. You're confused, she said gently. You've barely slept. I looked past her. Toward the back door, it was closed. The yard beyond it looked undisturbed. The oak stood whole. The tires swing hung motionless. No split trunk. No collapsed earth. I turned back to her. You heard it, I said. In the basement. You said the house felt occupied. She stared at me with a mix of concern and something else I couldn't quite name. I said it felt old, she replied, not occupied. I stepped closer to her, studying her face for cracks, for flickers, for signs of something wearing her shape. Her skin was warm when I touched her cheek, her pulse steady under my fingers. I remember the coffin, I said quietly. I remember the silence. I remember closing the lid. Her eyes softened. Of course you do. I swallowed. What color was it? I asked. She blinked. What? The coffin. What color was it? She hesitated. Only for a second. But I saw it. I don't remember, she said finally. Does it matter? Yes, it mattered. Because if neither of us could remember, then something had already been taken. A faint tremor passed through the floor, so subtle I might have missed it if I hadn't been waiting for it. She didn't react. I think we should leave, she said, just for a while. The suggestion should have comforted me. Instead, it confirmed everything. If she left, the house would tighten its grip. It would follow. It would claim what it was owed. No, I said. Her expression shifted. No, I'm not leaving, I replied. You can go. I'll stay. She stepped back as if I'd struck her. David, this is insane. Maybe, I admitted, but I know what I remember. I remember the fall. I remember the roots. I remember the voice saying they wanted continuity. I don't remember the color of the coffin. The tremor beneath us grew slightly stronger. A faint warmth seeped up through the soles of my shoes. I made a promise, I said. She shook her head. To who? I didn't answer. Instead, I walked past her and back toward the basement door. Behind me, she called my name. I didn't turn around. If I turned around, I might see something I couldn't reconcile. I went down the 11 steps again. The crack in the slab had widened in my absence. The soil beneath it looked freshly disturbed. I picked up the sledgehammer. You can't have both, I said to the house. You can't have her and me. The warmth surged in response, rising up my legs, wrapping around my waist like invisible arms. Footsteps sounded at the top of the stairs. David, stop. Her voice trembled now. For a second, doubt flickered through me, but doubt is how deals are renewed. I raised the hammer again. I'm staying, I said. The concrete beneath my feet split wide open. Darkness yawned below. The warmth turned into pressure, firm and insistent, pulling me downward. I didn't fight it this time. At the top of the stairs, Ellen screamed my name. I looked up once. She was framed in the doorway, fully lit by the kitchen light behind her. Alive, whole, unbroken. Then the floor gave way, and I dropped into the dark as the slab folded over me like a closing lid. The last thing I heard was her voice echoing down the stairwell. The last thing I felt was the house settling, satisfied, and somewhere far above, a front door opening. When I fell this time, there was no violent collapse, no snapping beams, no roaring earth. The concrete opened beneath me like a mouth that already knew my shape. And then it closed. I didn't hit bottom. That's the part that stays with me. There was no impact, no pain, just a gradual reduction of light until there was none, and then the sensation of standing upright again as if I had simply stepped into a deeper room. I was in the basement, whole, intact, unbroken. The slab above me, seamless. The stairs in place. The light on. I stood exactly where I had been before the crack widened. The sledgehammer lay at my feet. For a moment I thought I had blacked out, that the fall had been a seizure, a stress break, something explainable. My chest hurt, my throat burned like I had been screaming. Ellen? I called. No answer. I climbed the 11 steps. The kitchen was empty. Not recently empty. Not the kind of empty you feel when someone has just stepped into another room. It was staged, empty. Chairs tucked in. Counter wiped clean, her coat gone from the hook by the door. I walked to the sink and stared at the window above it. The oak tree stood in the yard, whole and unbroken. The tire swing hung perfectly still. I tried to remember its splitting. I remember the crack down its center. I remember the sound. But when I picture it now, I see bark intact. No scar. No break. I stepped outside. The air felt ordinary. Thin March, sunlight, distant crows. There were no tire tracks in the driveway. That was wrong. If she had left, if she had driven away, there would be some trace in the dirt. The driveway was soft from thaw, but it lay smooth, untouched. I walked to the road. No marks there either. "She's inside," I said out loud. The words steadied me. "She's still inside." The house loomed behind me, quiet, almost patient. It wasn't holding something under it. It was holding something within it. I went back inside and began opening doors. Bedroom. Empty. Bathroom. Towel folded neatly. Dry. Closet. Her suitcase gone. I stood in the center of the living room and tried to reconstruct time. No 4. We stood beside the grave. The coffin lowered. The first shovel of dirt. I remember the weight of the soil hitting wood. I remember the silence. I remember closing the lid. I cannot remember who else was there. Faces blur when I try to focus on them. Names slip away. The pastor's voice becomes wind. Was there a pastor? The memory shifts when I press it. I walk back to the kitchen and sit at the table. "She's here," I say. Again, quieter now. The floor beneath my feet hums faintly in agreement. The realization comes slowly, not like fear, not like panic, like logic. The house feeds on continuity. My father promised them. Time, lineage. If Ellen leaves, truly leaves, the chain breaks. So the house convinces me she's gone. It convinces me she was never here. I push back from the table and go to the basement again. The air is warmer this time. Not stifling. Just alive. I stand in the center of the slab. "I know what you're doing," I tell it. A faint vibration pulses upward. You can't hide her from me. The warmth concentrates beneath my feet, as if something directly below me is listening. "She didn't want this land," I continue. "She didn't agree to your deal." The hum shifts. Lower, almost amused. My mind flickers. Did she sign the inheritance papers with me? I remember sitting at the attorney's office. I remember the pen in my hand. I remember the notary sliding the document across the desk. I don't remember if she was in the chair beside me. That absence feels deliberate. The floor pulses again. "She's inside you," I whisper. The certainty settles. The house has absorbed her, folded her into its structure. Her voice at the top of the stairs, her coat on the hook, her saying she never left. Those weren't hallucinations. Those were fragments, residue. If I break the structure, I break the containment. I fetch the sledgehammer again. This time, I don't hesitate. The first strike lands in the center of the basement. Concrete fractures. The second strike widens it. On the third, the slab caves inward. Dark soil breathes up at me, warm and damp, and beneath the soil, not roots, fabric, blue. I drop to my knees and claw at the dirt. It's cloth. A sleeve. Ellen's coat. My vision narrows. My hands shake as I pull harder, tearing soil away in frantic handfuls. More fabric surfaces, then skin, cold. I freeze. The face beneath the dirt is hers. Eyes closed, hair matted with soil. Still. No, I breathe. The house hums louder, almost protective. I press my fingers to her neck. There is no pulse. I remember the coffin. I remember the silence. I remember closing the lid. I remember the color. It was blue. Not mahogany, not oak. Blue fabric lining. Her coat was blue. The memory fractures violently. The funeral. The coffin. The grave. It wasn't my father's funeral. It was hers. The basement sways around me. Know me. Mine does. The house did not take her. The house buried her. And I stand slowly. Her body dissolves beneath my hands. Not decaying. Not vanishing. Simply becoming soil again. The fabric slips back into earth as if it had never been disturbed. The slab begins to knit itself closed. No, I say, but the word has no strength. The crack seals. The basement returns to smooth, unbroken concrete. I am alone. Completely. The hum fades to a steady warmth. The house is quiet. Satisfied. She's inside, I whisper again. But now it sounds different. Less accusation. More comfort. If she is inside, she is still here. If she is still here, I am not alone. I sit down on the basement floor and lean against the wall. The warmth spreads gently around me. I close my eyes. I remember the coffin. I remember the silence. I remember closing the lid. I do not remember whose funeral it was. The house stands exactly where it has always stood. From the road, it looks tired but intact. The siding is weathered. The porch rail sags slightly at one end. The oak in the yard leans just enough to suggest age, not damage. The tire swing hangs motionless. No broken windows. No collapsed roof. No evidence of anything unusual. If you didn't know better, you'd say it was simply abandoned. Inside, the air is still. Dust gathers slowly along the baseboards. Light shifts across the kitchen floor in long afternoon bands. The table remains where it has always been. One chair slightly angled, as if someone rose from it mid-conversation. The basement door is closed. Behind it, the steps descend into shadow. In Albany, 3 hours south, Ellen wakes before sunrise. Her alarm goes off at 6:15. She reaches over and silences it without looking. The other side of the bed is empty, the sheets smooth and undisturbed. She lies there for a moment, staring at the ceiling, then exhales and sits up. Her townhouse is small but orderly, the kind of place built for one person who has learned to live quietly. She moves through her morning routine without hesitation. Coffee, shower, the navy blouse she wears on Thursdays. Her reflection in the bathroom mirror shows someone thinner than she used to be. Someone who has learned to carry weight without showing it. On the kitchen counter sits a small wooden box. Inside it are folded documents. A death certificate, a program from a memorial service, a photograph. In the photograph, she stands beside a casket at the edge of a grave. The casket is dark mahogany. Her hand rests on its polished surface. There is no one beside her. No second set of footprints in the dirt. No husband holding her hand. She studies the photo sometimes, as if expecting something in it to change it never does. She remembers the accident clearly. The call from the state trooper. The drive upstate alone. The hospital room too, quiet for machines that were no longer running. She remembers identifying the body. She remembers the funeral. She remembers the weight of the soil striking wood. She remembers closing the lid. At the edge of the woods, the house remains still. In the basement, beneath smooth, unbroken concrete, a warmth lingers. A man sits with his back against the wall, listening. He does not question the memory. He remembers the coffin. He remembers the silence. He remembers closing the lid. He does not remember the accident. He does not remember the hospital. He does not remember being alone at the funeral. The house does not speak anymore. It doesn't need to. It hums softly beneath him, steady and patient, like something that has been fed. Outside, the oak tree sways in a mild breeze. The tire swing moves an inch, then settles. No one drives up the gravel road. No one knocks at the door. From a distance, the house appears empty, and it will continue to appear that way for years. Inside, he stays.